I'm Nathan Martin with the Divine Pollination Hive and the UnityProcess.com. And this is Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, or tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So like you said, my name's Dylan. I don't entirely know where you want me to start. I started the Volitional Science Network a couple years ago, and my idea behind it, excuse me, was to start giving people tools that I've developed, intellectual tools to help them decipher. I guess I'm really good at putting things crudely. Help them to decipher bullshit in other people and give them the possibility to have a more productive way of dealing with it, because I realized, I'd say 5 years ago or so, that I had dealt with an extreme amount of bullshit my whole life. And I was defenseless against it. I mean, it was in my own family, and I was essentially programmed to deal with it, like most of us are. And once I developed the tools to start differentiating between, okay, does that make sense? Am I being manipulated here? Is that a valid argument? Or are my buttons being pushed to do whatever this other person wants me to do, despite whatever I want to do? And then, okay, if I can identify that, what do I do about it? And that development has led me to be able to kind of, I guess, symbolically break down what's going on between people and hopefully show that to other people so they can do the same thing and get themselves out of the bullshit that they've more likely been programmed into.
Okay, so it wasn't just about winning an argument to you. You wanted to understand the dynamics of the argument and the power play that was involved within some of these discussions.
Well, I like the fact that you used the term win, because it was about the fact that I kept losing the argument, right? I'm like, okay, I think I'm trying to figure out what's going on so everybody can win here, but for some reason I keep losing despite the fact I want everyone to win. Right. So why do I keep losing? And then I realized, well, it's because if somebody wants to put a win-lose situation onto you, you can't make it a win-win. Right. Unless they're willing to come up to you. So I realized I have to go down to them and say, okay, if we're going to play win-lose, I'm going to go for win. Right. And I had some very interesting results once I started shifting my attitude toward that.
Okay. And yeah, actually, so this is how I even came across you. I was in the Trivium group because I'm in a Trivium Facebook group with him, and he started posting an intellectual self-defense series. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I'm also out there and able to sense power plays. One of the things that I work on is emotional intelligence. And when you're working on emotional intelligence, you're very much going to feel when people are trying to pull a power play on you. And you're going to feel these power dynamics when they happen. And so I was just instantly drawn to his work, especially he had a really big presentation on grammatical fallacies that blew me away. I had already been seeing a lot of that stuff, but I just couldn't word it right. And the way that he worded it and fit it in with the Trivium, so he was speaking my language. And then he had clearly identified what was going on. I was like, that's it, that's it, that's it.
I'm glad.
That's how I found Dylan.
Awesome. You know, when you make these long things about something as abstract as a Trivium and you post it online, you're like, is anybody going to watch this?
Right.
I'd be interested, and I'm glad at least you watched it and you're like, okay, I got something good out of this.
Yeah, the grammatical fallacies, I was noticing it and I was seeing it. I hadn't actually created the class in my head of grammatical fallacy. I was really stuck in the logical fallacies. And then I would try to get people to work on their language and their words, and, you know, we need to define our terms and things like that when we go into a discussion. But I was definitely having problems with people manipulating these words and changing them.
Well, and then did you want me to make a quick commentary on the Trivium?
Sure.
So I discovered the Trivium from listening to Peace Revolution podcast, because it was Jan Irving, I believe, who... You dying over there? It was Jan Irving from Gnostic Media Podcast. I think he's calling it Logos Media Podcast now, who broke this concept with Gene O'Denning. And Peace Revolution podcast played it, and I was blown away by this concept of the trivium. I think a lot of us were. And when I got more into it, I bought the book, The Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph, which is what Gene O'Denning recommended. And I don't know if you've read it, but it is a brutal read. It's written like some 14th century scholar.
Plus it has out of order. It's logic and grammar out of order.
Well, she writes it in order. It's just the title that has it out of order.
Oh, okay. That's what I had heard from, but I must have.
Yeah, the title does have it out of order, but when you read it, it starts with grammar and goes to logic and then goes to rhetoric. However, when I read through it, and particularly when I spoke with Kevin Cole, who's a friend of the guy Richard Andrew Grove, who does Peace Revolution podcast, who's done a lot of research into the trivium, has found out that the story that's given about the trivium, that, schools once used to teach this, and it's based off of the 7 liberal arts that comes from Greece, and all the story is a complete fabrication.
Really?
Yeah, that there's elements that are drawn out that are put together from it, but the story that we hear of the trivium is kind of a modern interpretation of falsely understanding the history. And the issue that he brings up, and you can see this if you read the book, The Trivium, is that it is largely Platonic in its philosophical outlook. And I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with this kind of Aristotelian and Platonic battle that's happening. Mm-hmm. But this idea that there's this perfect world of forms, and that we need to understand this perfect world of forms in order to understand the trivium. Well, what happens if you make that assumption, and Sister Miriam Joseph makes this assumption in the book. She doesn't straight out say it like this, but you can tell because she talks about the essence. But before we have words, we have the essence of something. And from the essence, we have the term. We generate a term, and from the term, we're able to generate a word. The play between the term and the word is a little bit difficult to understand. But she starts with this essence. And I realized that essence that she's talking about is the Platonic form. Right? That there's this concept that exists outside of us that we're grappling to come up with a phonetic symbol to apply to in order to talk about. And Kevin Cole actually brought up that, I don't know how accurate this is, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it, is that the American Revolution partially was a war over the trivium, where are we going to start with an essence, which is an assumption that something already exists and that we're just dipping into it, and that thing that, of course, that we're dipping into is the great chain of being, which is how everything is, organized, and everybody has their place, and you're the authority over me, and I'm the authority over somebody else, and you can't move out of your spot? Or are we going to live in a world where we are creating our own words? There's a neologism where, okay, this word that we're creating, in a sense, it's real because we're describing something, I'm trying to describe a tree. It's out there, and maybe my word doesn't describe it correctly, but I'm still able to communicate something to you. Am I able to create something new from me in order to communicate with you, in order for us to create new ideas? Or are we dipping into this great chain of being that already exists that somebody has to teach to us? And after they do that, we find ourselves in this, structure that was already created that we're not allowed to question.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you're talking about like archetype. So is this primordial stuff, is that like the archetypes that we would like pull from, or is that something different?
I'm not entirely sure, but I understood Kevin Cole's point because he's heavily critical of the trivium. I think he throws the baby out with the bathwater. Mm-hmm. But he says this is nothing more than a mind control device to insert into you this preconceived notion of how the universe is supposed to work. Mm-hmm. However, I think the only thing that you have to shift is if you go to the grammar section and you look at the very beginning piece, which is the word. Mm-hmm. And Sister Miriam Joseph says, okay, the word comes from the essence, and the essence is, this Platonic world of forms, essentially, that we're dealing with, which, if she's a Catholic, that works perfect with Catholicism because, according to the Bible, there's this preconceived notions of the way things are, and God created everything. So in order for us to understand what's going on in the world, we have to understand what's going on in the mind of God. And if you're the authority on what God is, You get to tell me what those essences are as opposed to me figuring them out or creating them on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was looking at the trivium, I said, okay, this stuff still applies. Even if that's true, even if this is a device by which you could slip in mind control, even if that's true, all you got to do is change the grammatical aspect to a more Aristotelian version of reality, where you can say, okay, what we're saying is arbitrary because we don't fully understand what's going on here or going on outside of us, but we have as individuals the authority to figure out what that is and create words for it and communicate with each other with it. And when I thought about it that way, I really understood that grammar is the most important part of the trivium. Right. And if you get grammar, everything else is just kind of naturally emanates from that. Because the logic is just the way that we're putting the grammar together. So if I give you bad grammar,
well, he who controls the premises, he who controls the premises controls all the outcomes. I mean, if you're constantly putting premises in, then our mind in many ways works deductively, and say you have like puppet masters, whatever, and they're just constantly feeding premises, and then we take those premises without actually analyzing them. We don't do anything with them. Then we will deduce based on those premises certain outcomes, and it's logical, and it's perfectly logical, and the logic is sound.
Yes.
The logic can be sound, but it can be built on completely false premises.
Correct.
So control those premises, and you are God, essentially.
Yes. Yes. And lost my train of thought. I was talking about. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Here's the next thing about the trivium that I realized. So when I was deep into it, when it was kind of exposed on the internet, I think it was 2011 when Jan Irvin had that interview with Gino Denning, and everybody started getting into the fallacies, fallacy this, fallacy that, learn how to spot the fallacies, get really good at fallacies. And when I saw people discussing with each other and trying to use this, they would start pointing out fallacies to the person that they were discussing with. Well, what I realized, if somebody is a sophist and they're intent on manipulating you, if you point out a fallacy to them, they don't care.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So I'm trying to manipulate you.
That's what I do.
Yeah. And so the fact that you point out a fallacy, so what? I mean, and particularly if I'm a good sophist, I'm going to be able to flip that around and say, no, you're the one committing the fallacy. I'm going to take on your language and use it to manipulate you. And I'm like, okay, so just going around and saying all these fallacies and really understanding the logic isn't really serving me.
Okay,
so,
and really quick, can you define sophist for people? So
I'll define. There's two different ways I could define it. I think a quick way to define sophist is someone who uses words to manipulate others.
Okay.
Who pretends to use logic. I would define it more specifically as someone who pretends to come to you with a win-win situation, when in reality they're coming to you with a win-lose situation. And by you being tricked into thinking you're doing a win-win situation, you don't realize that you're in a fight, that a struggle has been given to you. And because you don't realize it, you by default accept the lose position. Okay. And so the sophist is attempting to have the benefits of dominating you without any of the risks of you retaliating because you never realize you're fighting.
Right. Okay. Good.
Did you want me to continue, or
well,
I feel like I'm hogging the
No, that's all right. I'm just interviewing, man.
Okay.
That's good. So a sophist, you had also talked about how there is a manipulation of responsibility. And now one of the things that is the key is that there is, when we set, let me just give a quick breakdown of boundaries and how it has to deal with responsibility, and you can address that. So a boundary is where you can know what is your responsibility, what is not your responsibility. For example, if there's a fence around our yard and there's a fence around my neighbor's yard, I know where my yard begins and ends, and I don't go and mow their yard. They don't go and mow my yard. I don't dump my trash over the fence into their yard. They don't dump their trash over the fence in my yard.
Unless you're in Italy. Sorry.
Yeah. And this is my responsibility, my yard is my responsibility, their yard is their responsibility. And we know this because we have boundaries delineating where my responsibility begins and where their responsibility begins.
Mm-hmm.
So now manipulation or sophistry has to do with manipulating responsibility.
Yeah, I like your yard analogy, where we say, okay, let's just look at the idea of mowing lawns and who's responsible for mowing what lawn. I guess to extend that metaphor, we could say sophistry is me convincing you that you need to mow my lawn,
right?
That you're responsible for mowing my lawn, or on the flip side, me convincing you that I am not responsible for mowing my lawn, and I don't know who has to mow it, but it's not going to be me, and you're the only person standing here, so. One of the things I realized when it comes to the trivium is that when we're looking at logic and we're looking at manipulation, we say, okay, in order to really identify manipulation, the syllogism is super important. We have to make sure that we're not breaking down the syllogism, and that ultimately all arguments can be written. I mean, nobody actually does this, but can be written as a string of syllogisms. Mm-hmm. And to have a bad argument is that there's a break somewhere in those syllogisms. Also, on the grammatical end, we can manipulate words where we can have the phonetic shell of a word that we could slip in a different meaning and slip into those syllogisms somewhere, so it's not clear that the syllogisms got broken because the meaning shifted for a word.
Right, and that would be a grammatical fallacy.
Yes. So what I realized is that the reason anybody does that is because they want to trick somebody into mowing their lawn, so to speak. And because what all our interactions boil down to is choice. Mm-hmm. We have the ability to make choices. We have free will in this universe that we don't have control over. And honestly, that's the only thing we really have to talk about. Because in this conversation, we're determining we're trying to discuss and figure out what choices that we're going to make. Now, a win-win situation is where we both have the ability to say, okay, well, I want to make this choice, and maybe you could make that choice, and I say the same thing back, and we can discuss and figure out what's going on. When lose is, I'm just going to get you to make that choice, regardless of what you want to do or what choice that I'm going to make. Mm-hmm. So in reality, choice implies responsibility, because your responsibility literally is your ability to respond or your ability to make a choice. So when it comes to the trivium, I realized that instead of looking at, okay, what exactly is the grammar and the logic and the syllogism, everything going on, if I looked at the responsibility that's going on, and we could say, okay, so, sometimes it's hard to determine where exactly that fence is if we use the lawn mowing analogy, but we know that there's a fence there. And we know that if I say, okay, you need to mow the lawn all the way up to right next to my house, so I can say, okay, I might not know where the fence is, but that's not where it is.
Right.
Right. You have way gone over this fence. If I could spot something where somebody is going way over that fence, where somebody is clearly throwing the responsibility way off and making myself responsible, I don't even need to go into the trivium to know that I'm dealing with sophistry. I know that something is being manipulated. And the example, I gave this on a recent interview video that I made, was a conversation I had with a friend a long time ago where we got in a disagreement because we were roommates over how I felt that he should be addressing me. He was a military guy, and he kind of had this military attitude in the house. And I'm like, I'm not military, and I'm not interested in living like this.
Yeah, and I'm not underneath you.
Yes. Well, and he wasn't treating me like that. It was more just the way he was addressing me, and the way he expected me to address him back, where I felt like he wasn't very clear about boundaries, which, in the military, that the guy above you can cross your boundaries whenever he wants, I guess.
Right.
So I had to I brought it up to him. I'm look, I don't really like the way that we're interacting here. And in this discussion, he was pretty stubborn, And he said, at some point, he said, look, this is the way I am and you can't change me. And I didn't realize it at the time, I'm able to think back about this, is that what he was doing is saying, I can't change. This is not a free will aspect that you're requesting for me to change. However, in doing so, he's saying you must.
Right.
Because we're at a point here where he doesn't want to change and I want him to. So either he has to change or I have to change myself and stop requesting that he changes. So by him saying I can't change, that means I must. So there's a responsibility here. Either one of us has to change or both of us has to. And he's pushing it over to me. He's saying, no, you got to mow this lawn.
Yeah.
Over next to my house. And one of the things that clicked to me is that that's a win-lose situation.
Yeah.
And if I try to continue having a conversation where I can say, okay, maybe I can convince you that you can change. I mean, maybe that'll work and I can convince him to change, but there's nothing I could say at that level where he just can't continue to repeat, I can't change. That's the way I am. That's the way I am. I can't change. Can't change me. That's the way I am. So what I did was, okay, I'm going to drop the level. And I flipped it on him. And I said, okay, well, the way I am is to accost somebody who says something like that to me, and I can't change. So now what? And
it's essentially calling the bluff on the my dad, and then kind of basically saying, yeah, and so my dad can beat up your dad. What's the point?
Yes. Well, and then what's interesting is it, like you said, it calls the bluff. It makes it apparent that we're having a fight. Now, in this case, we didn't want to fight each other. We wanted to get along.
Right.
He dropped it very quickly because I think he saw what he was doing. However, a lot of times when it's someone who doesn't want to get along with you, doing something like that will make it very, very clear to them that you see what's going on. Even if they didn't see, even if they don't even realize what they're doing, it doesn't matter. You see what's going on, and in my experience, they typically drop it because if they were courageous enough to dominate you openly, they would have done it in the first place. They wouldn't have tried some sneaky sophist maneuver. Like I said, they want the benefits of dominating you without the risks of you retaliating. If you start to retaliate, they're probably going to find somebody else to pull their crap on because now it's dangerous.
Right. Yeah, there's risk involved, and it's risk-free up until the point you realize what's going on.
And what I try to encourage people, and I've made several videos about this, is that you got to stop being reasonable when a situation like this occurs.
Okay.
Because in the win-win realm and the win-lose realm, if they come into contact with each other, the win-lose realm sets the stage for the interaction. And right. I like to compare this to chess. So chess is a game that has specific rules. It's got a specific board, specific pieces, and like a specific goal to win the game. And you and I are going to sit down and we're going to submit ourselves to the rules of chess and play this back and forth.
Right.
If one of us were to stop playing by those rules, if I were to start knocking pieces over, putting pieces back on the board, or taking two turns, or making moves up or whatever, we're no longer playing chess because chess is defined by the rules that govern it.
But that's just Logic. How I can't change. That's just how I play the game.
Okay, right. Well, that's a good point. Now, if that's true, if I continue to try playing chess, if you're just knocking pieces over, and I'm like, okay, I bet King's Gambit will fix this. I'll get him with the King's Gambit. Or I'm going to think 5 moves ahead now and really bring this on. I'm not playing the same game. And the game that we're actually playing is you defining whether or not you get to define the rules. Mm-hmm. And by continuing to try to play chess, I'm allowing you to define the rules and I lose by default. Right. It's like there's a boxing match going on and I didn't even show up, so you won. So what I tell people is stop playing chess. Stop trying to be reasonable. There's a lot of things that you can do. I mean, an option might be, okay, just leave. or not interact with the guy. But the last thing you want to do is continue trying to be reasonable because you look like an idiot, you waste a bunch of energy, and you lose by default.
Right.
And it's scary because, particularly because we live in a civilized society where we're supposed to be reasonable and we're supposed to get along, right? We're not living back in Mongol times where if you question the authority, they just chop your head off.
Right.
And we've been conditioned into thinking that if you do drop it, because what's that saying? Like, don't argue with a fool because they'll bring you down to their level.
And they'll beat you with experience.
They'll beat you with experience. Well, that's true if you think you're still having an argument.
Right.
If you take your gloves off and like, okay, let's fight, the fool's going to be like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
I'm going to go somewhere else. So when you drop that level, I want to get this across because I think people who are very smart have a tendency to think that being smart more in confrontational situations is better, when in reality, you got to drop that and be confrontational. I mean, with the hopes of maybe the person, like my friend in that situation, says, oh, wait, I'm realizing I'm not having a discussion. Let's go back to having a discussion. Great. Or at the very least, say, look, you're not going to have your way with me. Go somewhere else.
Yeah. So this actually brings us to one of the aspects of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and that is the imposter syndrome. So one of the aspects of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that some people, they don't think they're competent when they are. They're self-doubt. They don't trust their knowledge when they actually are competent. And then you have others who are overly confident and they are completely incompetent. So their confidence is misguided. It's foolish. They're fools pretending to be wise. And so, but then they have on the other side the people that are doubting themselves, but they're probably doubting themselves because they're arguing with fools and they're spending their time, interacting with those people. And that kind of causes a lot of doubt, I think.
Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, what's interesting about knowledge is that the more you gain, the more you realize you don't know. It's like a candlelight in the darkness. As the circle of light gets bigger and bigger, the circle of darkness surrounding it gets bigger and bigger as well. So I guess if you're sitting in the darkness and you can't tell how much darkness there is, you're like, well, I know everything about this darkness. Whereas you turn on a candlelight and you're like, oh my God, look at all this stuff I don't know. And then even though your knowledge is growing, you're just like aghast at all the stuff that you don't know, and it humbles you. Mm-hmm. So we had a conversation earlier that we didn't record where you're talking about intellectual humility. Mm-hmm. And that what typically happens is someone who becomes very knowledgeable on a subject is typically gains humility because they see all the stuff that they don't know. Well, it's nice to be humble, but at the same time, if you're allowing idiots to just go on a subject that they don't understand, whether that's in confrontation to you or whether that's someone pretending to be authority on a subject and nobody challenging him.
It's kind of like Bill Nye the Science Guy with his gender fluid stuff now.
Oh my God, Bill, talk about how many childhoods did you ruin coming out? I remember watching you when I was like 7 and I liked you. And now I don't anymore. Anyway, derailed me. You're talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah. So, no, it's I think the Dunning-Kruger effect lines up perfectly with what we've been talking about up until now. Is that?
Well, I think we need to define it before we get into how it applies, because I don't know if everybody knows what it is yet. So I'm gonna do a share screen here. There we go. Okay, so this is a meme and basic from the Free Thought Project. Did you know smart people underestimate themselves? Ignorant people think they're brilliant. It's a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the highly skilled assume that things they find easy are also easy for others, and the unskilled are so incompetent that they can't recognize their own stupidity. And really, they're so confident, and they seem like they must know because they're so confident. And then we trust. Our subconscious actually goes off and trusts this. We trust the body language. Yeah, they look competent because they're talking as if they're competent, and their body language gives off competence. But in all actuality, they're completely incompetent.
Well, they're competent at being manipulative shitheads.
Right.
Which is when you challenge them, they're very good at flipping stuff around and making you look like the idiot, and then you, knowing that you're only 80% competent on the subject, go, oh yeah, he must be referring to that 20% that I don't know, I better shut up.
Right. Yep, exactly. Now let me find another one here. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. So in the field of psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people of low ability have illusory superiority and mistakenly assess their cognitive ability as greater than it is. The cognitive bias of illusory superiority comes from the inability of low ability people to recognize their lack of ability. And without the self-awareness of metacognition, low ability people cannot objectively evaluate their actual competence or incompetence. So said another way, there's something here I want to, where is it?
Going through the meme folder.
Yep. So I wrote this out from some quotes. The skills that engender competence in a particular domain are often the very same skills necessary to evaluate competence in that domain, one's own or anybody else's. So it's like you have to develop those skills to even know if it's true or not.
Right.
And so if they don't have like critical thinking skills, and those are the very same skills that would recognize you giving a good argument. So you come in with a brilliant argument, you just smash it. And because they haven't developed their thinking skills, now they don't have the ability to even recognize your brilliant argument.
Can I give a caveat to that? It's worse. So when you give a brilliant argument, you're in this realm of win-win. You're in this realm of reason.
Yes. Higher
order thinking. And people, and this is unfortunate that I personally believe this is largely due to abusive upbringings, is they are not even aware of the concept of win-win. They are only aware of win-lose concepts. So now when you come to them with a win-win concept, they see that you're trying to win, therefore they must be losing.
Okay, and so this is the zero sum, and this is actually the mindset that defines leftism, the zero sum game.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why, I mean, I'm glad you brought up leftism, because I think Marxism can be defined very simply as someone who believes that all interactions are win-lose and that the only way to deal with them is physical violence. This is why, I'm sure anybody watching this has seen this on YouTube or experienced it personally. When you see these people at these protests going all over the Western world right now, where someone comes to them with a clear, concise, polite, nice attitude and a clear argument, and the person literally becomes violent.
Yep.
Is that this is the Marxist attitude, and I think this isn't something that like Marx created. I think this is something that he tapped into, which is a natural psychological state of somebody who has very stunted cognition.
Yeah, very victim mindset for sure.
Victim, and I bet they were. I bet they were a victim growing up, and it's really sad. But unfortunately, we got to deal with these people when they're adults. Is that these people will literally become violent when you speak to them, because all things are win-lose. They see that you're trying to win. Therefore, they must be trying to lose. And per Marxism, the only answer to that is physical violence.
Right.
So this is why, I figured this out, this is why they go off so violently when you just try to talk to them.
Yeah, it's you can see, I mean, they start shaking, they're really upset, they're angry, you're not compassionate, you're this, you're that. But they don't understand win-win. And and there's also envy in there, wrapped up in there as well.
Absolutely.
But that's because they don't know how to win with others. And if they see somebody winning, then it obviously came at somebody else's expense.
Yes.
So, and if it came at somebody else's expense, that person must be a villain.
Yeah. And of course, they don't understand if this is the most bizarre thing about Marxism. So that they have this idea that there's these layers of oppression. And the Communist Manifesto opens like this, right? There's the oppressors and the oppressed. There's these layers of oppression, and oppression can only go downwards. So what this means is if we zoom in and we say, okay, here's one class and here's the class immediately below it, the class above, per definition, anything that they do is oppressive. Anything.
Yep.
Even speaking. And per definition, anything that the class above does class below does to the class above isn't oppression. So this is why when you speak to them, it's violence, but when they do actual violence to you, it isn't.
Right.
This is what's going on in their heads.
Yeah, they rationalize it away as it's justified because I have the moral high ground, because I'm the weak and you're the strong, and if you're the strong, that means it was at my expense.
Correct. And I mean, this goes back to Platonic world of forms, is that these classes aren't real. They're made up. Right. Right. There's no workers class, or there is no SJW class, or you know, the identity politics. This is all just made up shit. That what they're doing is they're taking this made up idea, they're slapping it onto you, and that now becomes your permanent identity, which defines, you know, what behavior they're allowed to do to you, and what behavior you're supposedly allowed to do to them, and how they're allowed to react. It's terrifying. Yes, yes. And I mean, the only thing you can do is then drop down to their level and defend yourself at that level that they're attacking you at. Yeah. Well, and SJW, what is it? The social justice warriors, they usually attack from the emotional place. But sometimes, yes, you know, they're justified in morally punching a Nazi and that kind of stuff, right? Well, I mean, the Antifa guys are really the psychological class that fits. Yes. That fits that description. I've had my own run-in with them. I was punched many times. They didn't punch me very hard. I wasn't too concerned about that. But they splattered they'll put paint in Christmas ornaments. And they splattered me on the side of the head with a blue paint in this Christmas ornament. Wow. Yeah, because I went over and I tried to talk to them. Yeah, because anything that you could do, because you're obviously an oppressor because you don't have their same viewpoint. Well, no, they didn't even know what my viewpoint was. I was just standing over there, so obviously I'm an oppressor. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, and there's no rhyme or reason except for there's just a lot of aggression that's coming out in them. They have no idea about natural law. They're completely unnatural in that sense. You know, they completely violate the non-aggression principle. Well, and I'm going to say two opposing things. First of all, these people are highly immoral, and what they're doing is wrong, and they self-defense is absolutely justified against these people, and they really need to be seen as somebody dangerous. However, on the flip side of that, the description of, okay, there's these layers of oppression, and all interactions are win-lose, and the only way to overcome those win-lose interactions is through physical violence. I highly suspect that every single person who thinks that way, it was probably true for them in the household growing up. Right. That this is the world that their parents created for them, where all interactions were win-lose, and the only method of defense for them was physical violence. And then, you know, they graduate the household, and then they've never learned any better, and then they project what they've learned onto the rest of reality, which is really, really sad. But unfortunately for them, I have the right to defend myself, and that's technically not my problem. Right. You got to figure that out, not me. So yeah, it's not your responsibility to take something in the side of the head because they don't have their shit together. Correct. That's definitely that's like throwing their garbage into your yard. Yes. And we're going to throw it right back. So Dunning-Krueger effect. Yes. I saw that I had that picture up of that's a little meme that I post sometimes for people when they're being real assholes. Let me go back to it. So there is this thing that I picked up from an article, and I can't remember the article right off the top of my head. Oh yeah, Mount Stupid, yeah. Yeah. So it has Mount Stupid and the Valley of Despair, and then you have the expertise level and the confidence level. And so if you have, you know, just a little bit of expertise in something, all of a sudden your confidence is way high. But once you really start getting, you know, you start gaining more knowledge about it, you start realizing how much you don't know, and your confidence goes way down until you finally build back your confidence through hard work, effort, and actual experience, getting to that place of expertise, and you master it. But sometimes people will start just saying things, and they're pretty arrogant about it, and I'll say,
I'll just kind of post this right there where this is you. You see the meme there with
oh yeah,
the Mount Stupid.
yeah, which is good to call these people out on something that's to be slightly aggressive about it, because this is what I wanted to say is, so I think the Dunning-Krueger effect creates two main issues, and I mentioned them briefly. The first one is in your personal interactions and the people that you're personally dealing with. If you come across Mount Stupid, or if you were exhibiting Mount Stupid, it's not like you and I are free from this effect. We've got to fight it ourselves. I think this is a natural issue.
Yeah.
If you're encountering Mount Stupid, you personally have to deal with this person and how you're going to interact with. I mean, like, if this is at your work, if this is in your household, like, your behavior is going to be largely controlled over the fact that if you don't challenge this person, now you got to tiptoe around them.
Yeah, you're going to have to tiptoe, or they're going to own your ass.
Yes, kind of the same thing. The other issue is if somebody has a platform and they're just just blasting off stupid bullshit unchallenged, what they're doing is they're poisoning the rational capacity of the general population who is listening to them. And we as a society have to suffer from that.
Yep.
So what I think is very, 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 very important is to throw our intellectual humility into garbage, so to speak. Not 100% of the time, you can give the asterisk to that, but with a caveat to that. But when we do have some knowledge, if we have enough knowledge to understand that the person who is speaking is full of shit, even if we are to say something wrong in the process, it doesn't matter. The person must be challenged. Right. I've been listening to some Dan Pena. Do you know who that is?
No.
I really want to go to one of those guys' castle seminars. He's the $50 billion man. He essentially teaches people. He does a workshop and does a year-long coaching to teach people how to do like $1 million to $1 billion business deals. Mm-hmm. Like crash course, none of your own money. Like, this is how you got to talk to people, and this is how you do it. And he is a raging asshole. And he's like, you got to be in this world, and this is why I accomplished so much stuff. And one of the things he says is, I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. This is that confidence thing that you were saying, talking about. I want something. I'm going to get it. I might be wrong about the details, but I don't really care. Mm-hmm. Now, if you take this advice and you put it in the hands of someone who's like a Marxist, it's pretty bad. But for someone who is capable of critical thinking, I think this is really important, because if your research and study into critical thinking is causing you to keep your mouth shut,
right?
This is the opposite of what we want. We want more people speaking up. We want more critical thinking. So even if you're only 80%, or even if you're only 50%, if that knowledge is enough for you to shut somebody up who's like 0% on the topic, you use it. Doesn't matter if you're wrong. If they point out that you're wrong and say, okay, well, you missed this little detail, ignore it. Who cares? Get over it and continue to challenge the person.
That's the picking on minor points. Okay, yes. So I made a really good point, and you're making really bad points, and now you're going to only find fault in the minuscule things, and that's like a red herring. So that's
straw man popped up in my head. To give that as a real example, I remember a story from my great uncle who was telling me about our family farm. It's like 60 acres that isn't really used as a farm anymore because everybody who grew up there is too old to take care of it. They were renting out the field to someone to take care of their horses, and I guess the person just did this horrible job taking care of these horses and this horrible job of doing basic farming. And one of the things that he did was, when he put up the electric fence, he had some extra fence left over, and then he just coiled it up and threw it on the ground. And that, the fence was hot. That coil was hot. And my uncle found it, and he brought it up to the guy, and he's like, look, you've got this 20 foot of extra fence lying on the ground. And the guy went, it's not 20 feet, it's 10 feet. And my uncle goes, the important part was on the ground.
Right.
Like, I just made up a number. The important part was on the ground, man. So I think that's a perfect example of what you were just saying, that someone will try to nitpick some irrelevant detail, and you have to have the confidence to look at it and say, no, that part doesn't matter, and I know for sure that you are smart enough to understand that. Don't bullshit me.
Right. There's a principle in Love and Logic, which is a parenting style that I learned and took many classes on and worked with and still recommend to my clients and stuff. And it talks about how the child's job is just to get you into a power struggle. And if you know what you want and what you don't want, and you have a clear boundary.
The child's job?
Well, the child kind of like takes on this responsibility of, I'm going to manipulate you however I can to get the candy.
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
They want the candy. Their job is to try to get the candy. And you're going to put the boundary on the candy. You know, these are the circumstances under which you get the candy. This is the circumstances you don't get the candy. And this is, you know, how it's going to be. And I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm just saying what I'm going to do. I'm not giving you the candy. And then the child, you know, does things like, you're horrible. You're not good like all the other parents. And, you know, and then they kind of start bringing up those things, right? And in Love and Logic, they say, well, just start saying things like, I know, or nice try. And you just have like a key phrase that you repeat over and over again, because you don't go into the power struggle, because if you go into the power struggle, you lost. If all of a sudden you start saying, oh, no, I'm a really good parent. I've taken all these parenting. They don't care. They're like 5 years old. They don't care if you've taken parenting classes. You can't reason with them. You're trying to reason with somebody that's not actually using reason. They're using manipulation.
Well, and a 5-year-old isn't capable of reason.
Yes.
So personally, I think the reasonable aspects of the brain start to become awakened around the age of 8 or 9.
Yes. Well, the frontal lobes turn on around 8.
Okay. And I think the best way to understand this, and I say this remembering my own experience in elementary school, is that when we're in like first grade, we start learning our multiplication tables. Mm-hmm. And we don't learn them by understanding what multiplication is. You just learn them by repeating. If I say 5 times 5, you say
25.
25, right? You just memorize it. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember, I think I was in 3rd grade. My teacher went over and said, look, this is why 5 times 5 is 25. If I have 5 rocks or 5 things on the overhead that she had, little blocks, and I count that up 5 separate times, all together that equals 25. That's why 5 times 5 equals 25. Yep. Now, if you tried to tell me that in 1st grade, I was just like, I just don't know what you're talking about. I don't have the rational capacity to tackle that. But in 3rd grade, it's like, oh, I understand why that works now. So trying to apply that rational capacity to a child who's too young to get it, it's not going to work, like you said.
And one of the problems is
because of reason. I don't know what that means.
Right. Right. Exactly. You don't argue with that. Now, you can have conversations and stuff where you can ask them questions. They come to you with a problem. You can go, well, how do you think you're going to solve that? And then you can ask them questions. You can help them answer those questions by giving them options and that kind of thing. And that's very important for helping them develop reason. But it's a process of developing their reason. Now, a lot of people have just gone to school where they were told what to believe, and they were never told why. And they were never even given things like multilogical problems. Like, okay, we're going to talk about the Revolutionary War, but we're going to look at Britain's perspective of it. What? We're just told we're told the perspective, and that's it. We're not actually discussing different perspectives.
You're punished for not accepting the perspective.
Yes, and you get bad grades if you don't take their perspective. And so now you have a whole bunch of people that have like this emotional attachment to being right because you get grades for that. And now now you have to be right at everything, and it becomes this win-win kind of a situation, or win-lose type of a situation, because, well, they learned that you could lose in school. It wasn't something that was self-directed. It was, we're going to tell you what to believe, not how to think.
Right. And I'm going to give you emotional points, AKA grades, for repeating the things that I want you to repeat.
Yeah. So, so in a lot of ways, we're dealing with emotional children in adult bodies, especially when the Dunning-Krueger effect is happening. You have somebody that's spouting off as if they know it all, and they don't necessarily know it all, but because of they're relating emotionally and not intellectually, then it's
well. And I'm hesitant to bring this word up because this is a very powerful and dangerous word, which is narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
And I've made a few videos on narcissism, and at some point, I actually stumbled across an article about narcissistic parents several years ago,
mm-hmm.
and it freaked me out so much because I thought when I was reading, whoever wrote the article must have watched my life growing up and literally wrote an article about my mother. Because every single point that they brought up about, okay, this is what a narcissistic parent or specifically a narcissistic mother would do, it was like bullet by bullet, exactly my mom.
Wow.
Bullet by bullet, exactly my mom. And I'm like, what? And what I found out later is that this narcissism, it's not just like an insult that you throw at somebody who's like really into the way that they look. This is like a clinical, psychological, awful issue, right, where a person is incapable of dealing with their own emotions. They're incapable of satisfying themselves emotionally, and they must suck it out of you. And one of the ways they suck it out of you is they have to be constantly praised. They have to be constantly better than you. And the way that they do that is they constantly humiliate you, and they have to be in control.
And
it's so common and so repeatable is not the word I want. So
such a pattern.
Thank you. Pattern is the word I want. That the pattern is so similar that someone can write a general article about the condition, and when you read it, and if it's like one of your parents fit the category, you think they're writing about you, about your personal situation. It's that common, and the pattern is that similar. So in terms of narcissism, I wanted to bring this up because you said we're talking about how people are emotionally children, and they put themselves in this win-lose situation.
Well, what is the psychological age of narcissism? Because there is a developmental age where children are naturally narcissistic because they're going through, they're developing. But then if you get stunted at that age, now you're stuck in narcissism for the rest of your life.
This is why I wanted to be careful with this word. I think there's a difference between narcissism and simply, like, narcissism is the win-lose situation on steroids.
Right.
Where you are it's not just that everything is win-lose. You are incapable of losing. You will fight to the death at making sure that you don't lose. And it could be something simply as innocuous as like, you like something that I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that vaguely, maybe kind of sort of questions my interpretation of what's going on. That must be attacked like it's the most dangerous thing to me possible. That's what I mean by narcissism.
That would cause somebody to do that, because if they want attention, what is it about attacking? Why would a narcissist who wants attention be attacking something like that?
That is a question that I have asked myself.
Okay, good. Well, so,
I can guess. I mean, I'm no psychologist or neurologist or anything, but I think it has to do with the fact that these people are unable to create emotions that are satisfying to themselves. Mm-hmm. It's vampirism.
So it's envy then.
Well, it's definitely envy, and it's vampirism in the sense that they have to feed off of somebody else's emotions. Mm-hmm. They have to feed off of somebody else's well-being. And if somebody looks well, that brings out the envy. They become viciously jealous. And again, this is because remember, the narcissist they're the center of the universe. Everything's about them. And anything that challenges that, or anything that goes outside of their control, is so criminal to them that any form of punishment is justified to get that back into line with what they want.
Okay, so now we're also looking at Machiavellianism.
Yeah, it's all of it. Again, this is why I wanted to be careful with this word, because when I use the word narcissist, I put it up there with the word psychopath and sociopath.
Well, isn't that part of the dark triad?
I haven't heard of the dark triad, but I would.
Let me just look it up really quick. Dark triad traits. A dark triad is a subject in psychology that focuses on 3 personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. So when I'm using the term narcissist, I am throwing a very, very, very heavy word for somebody who is incredibly evil and very, very good at hiding the fact that they're evil.
Well, that's a psychopathy, right?
Yeah. Well, it applies to that as well. But the narcissist is like seductive, and they get off on it.
Right.
And in terms of like, if you show them something that they're doing, in 5 seconds, they'll have you believing that, no, you did that. Mm-hmm. And the intellectual self-defense required to deal with these people is so immense that it really doesn't matter how good you get at training in your intellectual self-defense. They will find a wedge and get you tripping and double thinking on yourself. They're that good. They're just that good, and they're that dangerous. And
well, some people are, I know that there's people even trained in this, like you get shills and things like that, where they're literally trained to fuck with people in this way.
Yes. And they have to be narcissists to begin with in order to do that. Or because, I mean, a normal person would be like, I can't deal with my own soul. Right. With this. So we started with children. The emotional age of an adult is kind of like, can you bring me back to where we were? Because I don't want to like derail this and not be able to bring it back.
Okay. Well, I know that there's like a developmental age for narcissism where people naturally go through a narcissistic phase in their development, but people get stuck there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's worse than that, because there's a level of getting stuck in that emotional childhood. Mm-hmm. Where you see everything as win-lose, and then there's a level above that, which is narcissism, clinical narcissism. And it is much, 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 much more dangerous than your average dumbass sophist.
Right. So you have narcissistic tendencies, and then you have narcissism, and the two are a tendency, maybe how you might react when you're in stress, but ordinarily you're not doing that. But maybe in a stressful situation, your narcissistic tendencies kick in, or I've had in the past OCD tendencies, which I don't have anymore. But I had tendencies during stressful situations to kind of go a little OCD on things. And so but it was just a tendency, and we can have those tendencies, but that's obviously not this, full-blown disorder. And if you have the disorder, you got problems.
Yeah. Well, and then the narcissist won't agree. To the narcissist, everything's great. They're the center of the universe. Right. I think a better thing to say is, if you're near one, you got problems. Right. You need to get away from that person.
Now, I want to say something really quick on that, because this is actually what we do for a living. We help people to understand why they're creating their life and how they are a match psychologically. Some people might say energetically or whatever, but there's a sense of resonance that you get, because if you are consistently attracting psychopaths into your life, that means that you are a psychological match for that. And it doesn't mean you're necessarily are one, but maybe you are used to
supporting it.
Yeah, you're supporting it somehow, you're enabling it, and you need to work through whatever codependency issues that you have by examining your thought patterns and looking at the patterns in your life and working through those, or even healing traumas. And then once you can do that, you can remove yourself and no longer recreate that experience in your life, and now you're narcissist free. So, okay, that was just a little plug for what we do.
Yeah, and then to go on that a little more, someone who's like that, and I fit that category perfectly not that long ago, is they've been trained that way by a narcissist or by a psychopath. So you've been trained to be vampire food.
Yep.
And they've got it down so hard is you will punish yourself for trying to think outside of that box. That's how deep the training goes. And so,
Stockholm syndrome. And also you have, in that way, it's like kind of like an external locus where you are you're gaining from serving them in your purpose, or you get your purpose from serving them, and you get your meaning from their approval.
Yes.
And it's a really bad place to be.
Yes. Yes. And before I guess before we move on, I just want to emphasize this, is that I don't want to confuse that with the narcissistic tendencies of what children exhibit.
Yes.
Because what children, when they get to that phase, and I think around ages 4 or 5 is when they start to pick, around ages 2 or 3, they start to pick this up. Because before 2 or 3, a child is just kind of like this organic robot. Right? It's just like it needs food, it needs care, it needs warmth, it needs its diaper changed, and that's about it. I understand that's an oversimplification of the situation.
Right.
But around the age 2 or 3, they learn how to say no. Mm-hmm. And what no is it's saying I'm separate from everything else that's going on. Right. That's the birth of the ego. But at that point in the saying no, the upgrade that they've received is hierarchy. They're starting to learn how to establish hierarchy, and hierarchy is all about pecking order. So they're saying, okay, who's in charge here? Right. Is it me or the parents? And then, well, if there's any siblings, who's in charge of the sibling interaction? And it's not about, okay, what do we agree that we should be doing? It's about who's telling who what to do. Right. And that's the only tool that they have to apply to everything.
Right. It's not based on competence, because like Dr. Peterson talks about, you go from, you have your power hierarchies and then you have competence hierarchies, and people often mistake the two and they only see hierarchy. They don't distinguish between the two. If you don't distinguish, then you're going to have some problems.
Yep. And then for the child at that age, it's only a power hierarchy.
Right. And that's how you have to deal with them. And in fact, this is how you have to deal with narcissists also. Because you can't deal in a competence hierarchy with a narcissist, because they're not going to understand that. Or I would say with Dunning-Krueger effect.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, let's maybe we should leave the narcissist talk for another thing, because that's its own realm of hell.
Yeah,
let's just stick with the
Dunning-Krueger effect. With the Dunning-Krueger effect, it's really, they confuse obviously the two, and they don't see a difference or a distinction between competence and power, because everything is about power. And well, to at least a Marxist, everything is about power. And I would think that...
Small caveat, I agree with you. They think everything is about power. The thing that makes the Marxists special is that they believe that physical violence is the only answer to that power struggle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At least that's my observation.
Okay. Well, I know that there's a bunch of Marxist proxies like feminism and multiculturalism, veganism,
identity
environmentalism, identity politics, all that stuff all those are Marxist proxies that are running in the spirit of Marxism without the name.
Right. And I mean, it doesn't even have to be called Marxism. Like, I don't think Marx created this psychological aspect of where a human could fall into and say, okay, I only see things in terms of win-lose, and I feel that the only way to deal with that is physical violence. I'm sure that's existed.
The first archetype of this is the first archetype, or the first story that a lot of people see about this is the story of Cain and Abel. That was Cain was obviously seeing it through the lens of win-lose, and
physical violence was the only option.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was envy. That was all about envy. That's not just jealousy. That's envy, and envy is a little bit different than jealousy.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to make that distinction, because there are people who see things as win-lose that I wouldn't describe as Marxists, because they don't immediately go to the physical violence thing.
Okay. Okay. Good.
They'll be manipulative, or they'll be sneaky, or they'll try to twist your words around, and maybe they actually want you to do something. For a lot of people, they just want the satisfaction, the ego boost, and again, we could play with the word narcissism, but narcissism is this on steroids. Is they want the ego boost of having won.
Right.
Even if they didn't get anything physical out of it. And a lot of them are afraid of conflict, and they want that ego boost for free. That they don't want to have to fight for it. And I think this is where the sophistry comes from.
Okay. Good.
Sorry, I totally derailed you.
No, that's all right. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this? Because I also have something from the Gnostics. The creation story actually talks about the Dunning-Krueger effect, I think.
Go for it.
Okay, let me share that. So in the hypostasis of the archons, or the reality of the rulers, which I took this from the Nag Hammadi library.
Hypostasis. I haven't heard that word before. I'm open to my etymology dictionary while I do that. Okay. Go ahead.
So on account of the reality of the authorities, inspired by the spirit of the Father of Truth, the great apostle, referring to the authorities of the darkness, told us that our contest is not against flesh and blood, rather the authorities of the universe and the spirits of wickedness. I have sent this to you because you inquire about the reality of the authorities. Their chief is blind. Because of his power, and in his ignorance and his arrogance, he said, with his power, it is I who am God, there is none apart from me. When he said this, he sinned against the entirety, and this speech got up to incorruptibility. Then there was a voice which came forth from incorruptibility, saying, you are mistaken, Samael, which is God of the blind. So Samael etymologically is God of the blind. And that is one of the names for Satan or Lucifer, that kind of thing. The Gnostics, that's kind of like the primary bad guy in Gnosticism.
Just throwing this in there, I looked up the etymology dictionary. I knew hypo meant under in Greek, but I couldn't remember what stasis was. Stasis is standing or a position, so hypostasis literally means understanding.
Oh, good.
There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, so the reality, they translate it reality, but you're right.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair translation.
Okay. So in this, we see that there's kind of like a blindness that people with the Dunning-Krueger effect have. They're making these claims. They're very arrogant in this claim. It's intellectual pretentiousness to claim things that they can't know. So it's the opposite of humility. So somebody who's humble would say, well, I'm not all there is, and I know that there's a lot out there that I don't know. And Gnosticism is all about knowing. And so, yeah, in this, it's, there we go. What do you have to say on that, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a nice story that goes that describes this. And then, by the way, I keep looking around like this because I got this camera in front of my screen, and it's kind of blocking where the words are coming up.
Oh, okay.
But actually, no, I can fix that. I thought I could fix it. Never mind. I'll just do this. Yeah, where someone has the authority to say, I'm it, and I'm the person who's describing everything that is going on, and to say that this isn't a contest against flesh and blood. Rather, our contest is not against flesh and blood, rather the authorities of the universe and the spirits of wickedness. Yeah. So this is a contest over who gets to describe what's going on in reality. Mm-hmm. And for someone to come up and say, I am the describer, I will tell you what's going on. Well, obviously there's no way anybody could ever do that.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's very clear, Dunning-Krueger effect. And what I have to thank Jordan Peterson for this, for pointing out the meaning of the word sin. Because in all my church growing up, nobody ever was able to tell me this or make this point out to me. I thought sin always meant it means to transgress against God, but to do something that God told you not to do, or vice versa, to not do something that God told you to do. What sin literally means is to miss the mark. It's an archery term.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, that makes more sense there's a certain goal and you missed it. So when it says here, I got to look around my camera. When he said this, he sinned against the entirety. And of course, entirety could be like God, or entirety could be like the universe. He missed the mark against the entirety, which is he's completely wrong at this.
Yeah, he's way off the mark.
He's just way off the mark on this.
Didn't
which
even
is why he's out of the blind.
Yep. Good. There was something I wanted to say, and it just totally vaporized from my mind.
Happens to me all the time.
I cannot remember for the life of me. And I was like, God, it was so good too. I was like, oh.
Happens to me all the damn time. Did it have to do with Jordan Peterson missing the mark?
No.
Okay.
But I did learn also, I had learned that term about sin back when I was Jewish. So
back when you were Jewish.
Yeah.
L'chaim.
Oh yeah. So, I converted back in 2004. So
To or from?
I converted from Christianity.
Wait, what? To Christianity from Judaism?
No. Converted to Judaism from Christianity.
So you're just stepping down that ladder?
Right, but now I interpret things more from a Hermetic and Gnostic perspective.
Yeah.
And I use the New Testament all the time now because I don't see it as literal.
Right.
So I'm looking at these things as psychological archetypes and not as literal things that happen. Like there was not like some actual person doing this. People are doing this all the time. Just like, the crucifixion of Jesus is the crucifixion of reason, and the mob mentality crucifying reason for whatever their emotional attachment is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm just seeing those things as archetypes now and not literal events.
Cool.
Okay. So I think, where are we at right now? Oh,
we're a good hour into it, hour or more.
So any other thoughts that you have on the Dunning-Krueger? Well, actually, let's talk about, what do you think you can do? How do you deal with people when they're displaying the Dunning-Krueger effect?
Yeah, you punch them in the face. Because the only answer to oppressive situations is physical violence.
Oh, so you're impressive.
No, well, like I said, I brought up, there's two issues, one where you're personally dealing with it, and one where the person kind of has a platform where they're speaking to kind of on a societal general level. If you're personally dealing with it, the most important thing, I think, is to not be reasonable.
Okay.
Like, there's... what exactly you do about it is kind of a similar conversation to what should you do in a physical fight. It's like, well, there's 8 million interpretations and ways to train for what you should do in an actual physical fight.
Let's address that thing you just said, though. You said you can't be reasonable. And why can you not be reasonable? Because
you lose by default.
Right. And also it's like they're obviously, they don't even have the skills. The whole point of the Dunning-Krueger effect is they don't have the skills to even understand a competent argument, to recognize it. So if you write a competent argument, they can't recognize it anyways, because they wouldn't be behaving in such a way with the Dunning-Krueger effect if they did.
Yeah, it's going back to chess. It's like you're playing brilliant chess moves against someone who's just like knocking pieces around the board. Yeah,
there's that joke about the you can't play chess with a dove because he just walks around, shits on the board, knocks everything over. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, and emotionally speaking, to the person who runs into this, and I'm saying, okay, stop being reasonable. The issue that you're going to have to overcome is that if you do challenge this person, and I'm not saying challenge is the only option, walk away is also an option, and pretending to be reasonable is also an option. For example, if it's a dangerous situation where if you challenge this person, it might actually be physically dangerous. Mm-hmm. Pretending to be reasonable is an option to bide your time until you can get out of there, or until you have a more opportune time to strike. Mm-hmm. The issue that people are going to run against is, first of all, we've been trained that you need to, being reasonable is kind of like the ultimate aspect of what you're supposed to be doing. You should always try to remain to be civil. The other problem is, if you do challenge this person and there's other people watching, most people don't get this stuff, and they're going to blame you for starting that fight.
Yeah. Even though
they're going to look at you and say, wow, you're an asshole. Mm-hmm. That guy was being totally nice, and you just hauled off and emotionally smacked him. Mm-hmm. You got to be prepared to deal with this. And I mean, again, how you deal with them is another question of strategy. Typically what I'll do is I'll take them all on. I'm like, no, you're all assholes. You all missed it. You're all wrong.
Yeah.
And if you want to fight with me about it, I'm prepared to do to you what I just did to that guy. And typically that shuts them up because they're sheep. If they weren't sheep, they would have spotted what was going on in the first place. But the reason it's so important not to be reasonable, even if you don't get very confrontational, like I just described, is that you can say, okay, it doesn't matter to me. This is what I've heard a lot. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to let it go by. Well, that's not possible. You can't be neutral in a situation, because if you allow the person to continue doing what they're doing, what you're doing is you're accepting that lose position, which means, like we said, you're either going to be tiptoeing around them, or they're simply just going to be controlling you.
Right.
And now, and that's on the person-to-person interaction. on the more general interaction, that person is kind of, poisoning the general breathing air of everybody else, where, again, you're going to have to tiptoe around the general populace, because if you challenge this guy, or if you challenge the ideas that are being spouted by this guy, the general populace is going to look at you and say, look, you're challenging you're wrong because I'm listening to this guy, and I'm going to make a problem for you. So in order to challenge what, if someone has a platform, is you got to develop your own platform, or you somehow have to get at his platform to at least create a rift.
Well, I think
where there's some
thing
sort of
is
debate
creating
going
your own
on.
platform, right? I think you nailed something right there, is creating your own platform. We kind of need to respect people in their space, even if they're delusional in their space. Now, it's when their space starts encroaching on our space and starts trying to overtake our space, that's when we need to say something, right? So
Like mainstream media.
Right. I mean, they're demonizing everybody. And
well, no, it's worse than that, where they're killing people. Because wars are literally started over the bullshit that they talk about. So any sort of culture jamming or any sort of getting in their face is totally justified, because they are willing to I mean, what's the death count in Iraq? It's like 500,000 people. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, when you're dealing with something like that, because this is why I say that you can't take a neutral stance in this. It's not like, well, I just don't want to make a big deal out of it, and it doesn't mean that much to me. It's like, okay, yeah, well, now, in this case, 500,000 people are dead, and the whole country is destabilized. It's littered with depleted uranium, and we're destroying Europe by flooding the after effects of these people into these first world nations. You can't say it's not your problem.
Right. And
a lot of this is caused by, particularly with the media, because it's so weird, because they're just talking. They're not the ones throwing the bombs. They're not the ones like shooting the machine guns and paying the money to send the military.
Psychological warfare.
They're just talking, right? So someone's got. I mean, that's how powerful talking is.
Right. So
someone's got to talk back.
Well, there's a Jordan Peterson thing. He says, "If I don't get to speak, I can't think."
Yeah.
So If I don't get to speak, I don't get to think. And so we need to be able to also enter in and have a place to enter in our voice into things. And the problem is that's becoming more and more difficult.
Well,
with censorship and stuff.
It is, but we still have to take into account the internet is still here, and you and I are still able to do this.
Yes, yes.
50 years ago, it would have been just it wouldn't have been impossible because of censorship. It was just impossible for technological reasons.
Right.
So we even though the censorship is coming and the battle has started, we're still in this golden era of this even being possible, and the fact that someone can listen to this after we're done. There was something else I wanted to say, and it escaped me like it just escaped you. We were talking about platforms. Just move on. If I think of it, I'll bring it up.
Okay. Well, I definitely, like, there was the quote about you don't want to focus on, destroying the old, but building the new.
I remember.
Okay.
So with voice, and I think this is going to be something different that you're going to hear from me that you're not going to hear from somebody else talking about intellectual self-defense, is literally training the muscles of your voice. Mm-hmm. And in the most literal muscle sense, train the muscles of your voice. Because this happened to me, is I used to be afraid to speak. And I used to have very bad posture, which choked off my voice, and it was hard to speak up.
Okay.
And I'm sure this is because if I spoke up when I was a child, I would just be ruthlessly punished. Right. And I taught how to shut myself up. And the way you shut yourself up is by literally clamping your vocal cords.
Okay.
And so by learning how to access your voice, the way I learned it was actually from, I was talking to you about my Shinto experience, is when I learned Aikido, I actually learned it in a Shinto shrine, and my instructor was a Shinto priest, and we actually did the Shinto stuff along with the Aikido, and there's a lot of, they call it praying, but to the Western person, they see it as chanting. There's a lot of chanting in this stuff, and I got really into it. And as I started doing more and more of this chanting, my vocal cords started opening up.
Oh.
My posture started getting straight. And I found out I had an incredibly powerful voice. And I remember when we would chant, I was like louder than everybody else combined when we were doing the prayers before and after class. And what I realized is that in terms of literal volume, I can challenge somebody.
Okay. Now you're talking about, what about the whole thing of some people kind of escalate and they get louder and then they get louder and then they get louder and then they get louder. And it's really just a shouting match at that point, because you see this all the time.
I agree. But if you don't have a voice, you can't even enter that game.
Right.
So of course we need to learn how to refine it. We need to learn how to do it better. But if there's no volume, you just have nothing.
Right. I mean, you're not here talking to me and drowning me out the whole time. I'm giving you this platform to talk, and I'm asking you questions and stuff like that. But no way are you competing with me or drowning me out. There's a collaborative dialogue happening.
Sure, but I could if I wanted to. I could if I wanted to. Well, I have the physical ability that
right.
if I didn't like you and I thought that you were displaying bullshit, I could drown you out and I could shout you down.
Okay, and in what sense would that become, necessary?
If you're manipulating me or you're manipulation is even too soft of a word, because manipulation implies I'm trying to dance around the fact that I'm not dominating you. If you're openly dominating me,
mm-hmm.
and I need to yell at you to get you to stop, I can do it.
Right.
When I was younger, I couldn't. Literally physically, I couldn't get the noises to come out of my mouth because I was too scared. And even after I shouldn't say even after, it goes hand in hand that the physiology of your muscles, I mean, this is a psychosomatic thing that,
mm-hmm.
Wilhelm Reich really started opening the box of, is that when you start changing the physiology of your muscles, you'll start changing the psychology of your mind. And so by learning to train the actual muscles and adjust the actual posture of my throat helped me learn how to express my voice and get my views or get my arguments across. Because ultimately, I've been thinking about this, ultimately, reason and rationality is just a nuanced organization of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, even though we're talking about like, okay, we could set up and have a conversation and have it be win-win, it's whoever is currently speaking is dominating the conversation in a certain sense. You see what I'm saying? We have to take turns.
Right.
And in order to be reasonable, there's certain rules that we set up about, okay, how do we go back and forth and how do we take turns? So in a certain sense, reason is just kind of this nuance of how we're balancing these emotions out.
It's ordering it, right? It's ordering
these emotions around. So at some level, with you, I am, and I think you feel the same with me. I can let my guard down and just assume that we're good at taking turns of who needs to talk. And if you want to interrupt me, I'll shut up. And if I want to interrupt you, you'll shut up. Or if you really want to get a point across, you'll be like, hey, don't interrupt me. I want to keep talking. We can assume those rules and be safe with that.
Yeah, because it's a collaborative discussion, and we're actually adept at collaborative dialogue.
Correct. Now, most people aren't.
Right.
So you may have to drown somebody out and shut somebody up. And I will literally tell someone to shut the fuck up.
Are you aware of the concept of a pattern interrupt?
Oh, yeah. That's what we do in Aikido.
Okay, so how could what you're talking about be similar to a pattern interrupt with using your voice?
Well, there's the literal shock of volume,
mm-hmm.
right? And some people are simply going to be louder than others on this, but there's a literal shock of, what was that noise? And there's also the kind of the frustration of being drowned out, because this is another thing that I've noticed is persistence in talking. You ever try to interrupt somebody and it doesn't work and they just keep talking?
Yep. And
if it's in a civil situation, sometimes you let them do that, but there's sometimes you got to get them to shut up. And if you tell them literally to shut the fuck up and they don't, and they just keep talking, it's like, well, what do you do? Well,
I had a friend I had to do that one a couple of times. I'd be like, Just, hey, shut up. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up.
So one thing I've actually learned is that if someone just keeps droning on because they're just trying to drone over me, I will just start droning back and I'm just going to keep talking like this. I have nothing really important to say, but what's important is things just keep coming out of my mouth and I'm just going to keep making noises until you shut up and I'm just going to keep going and go. And I mean, you just got to show that I'm committed to doing this until you shut up.
Do you find yourself having problems with this?
Without a voice.
Do you find yourself having problems with this?
What do you mean?
So like now that you have developed these skills, do you have a lot of opportunities to use them? Or do you find that the more refined you get, the more you interact with refined people and it's not a problem?
Well, I have noticed that people don't mess with me as much.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one of the funny things that happened during the 2016 election is that I'm sure you read the reports of people being massively unfriended due to their political views.
Yeah.
Right, or that people were afraid to post stuff onto their Facebook or social media because they would get a lot of negative flack. Well, when I stood up and said, okay, I'm going to openly express that I support Donald Trump in this election, like my pushback was like, beep.
Yep.
Now, I don't know if that's because I had already filtered out all the bullshitters off of my friends list, or if I did have bullshitters that they were afraid to speak up against me because I'd make it unpleasant for them. And
right.
You know, one of the things I do is I find this on Facebook. I try to avoid arguing on Facebook or YouTube or whatever else because it's so bullshit. But I mean, at some point you got to say something.
Right.
And you got to choose it carefully. One of the things I've started doing is that if I get in a disagreement over somebody who's obviously being a dumbass, the shield that you're able to hide behind, and this isn't inclusive to Facebook, it's practically any internet forum, is that a person can write a message uninterrupted.
Yeah.
Is that they can spend 24 hours coming up with some diatribe that's this massive text wall that you're supposed to be expected to respond to because you can't interrupt them. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, we're having a disagreement. Let's have a recorded debate that we're going to post on YouTube. Yeah. Challenge. I've never had somebody accept that challenge ever. They shut up and they don't respond.
Wow.
And I think what that's doing is emphasizing the power of voice, where I'm like, okay, let's put our voices against each other and see what happens. And because I have that voice power, I think people are a little hesitant. I mean, not to say that I'm going to win an argument, but it is to say that you're going to have to fight me going down, and it's not going to be very pleasant.
What is the aspect of the metaphysical concept of the logos and the philosophical concept of the logos? How is that related to the physical voice?
You're going to have to come a little bit more down to earth for me, boy. I can handle that, but tell me what you mean by metaphysical concept of the logos.
Well, the philosophical, actually, like the logos is this, the divine reason. Jesus represented the logos to the Gnostics. The logos became flesh and dwelt among us, and it's translated in the Christian Bible as the Word. And a lot of people, there is a spoken aspect to this. When you have your voice, when you're able to speak your truth, and when it's based on obviously actual truth and not just BS. But there is
perception is reality, subjective is crap. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, and we can align our subjective. It's great to have preferences. The problem. Now I remember what I was going to say.
Alrighty.
Okay, so they were talking about in the hypostasis of the archons. They were talking about blasphemy. He was blaspheming against God. Well, what was going on was he was taking his personal preferences and elevating them to the place of the objective. That is blasphemy. That's the how I understand blasphemy is when somebody takes their subjective preferences and makes them objective. And now you have to do it because of my subjective feelings or on the matter. So my subjective truth, I start pushing it on you as objective reality, and that's blasphemy.
Well, it's manipulation.
Yeah.
Right. So what exactly was the question?
Okay. So that was, I finally remembered.
No, that was the definition. Got it. Yep.
Finally, I remembered. No, the question is how is the volume, the physical volume of your voice and your ability to speak eloquently, and even really the third aspect of the trivium, which is rhetoric. How is that connected to the logos, the concept of the logos, in your mind, in your understanding? I mean, because we're logocentric people. Logocentric is enlightenment values.
So I find for myself that in order for me to figure something out, to work out an idea, I either have to talk to people about it or I have to write it down.
Mm-hmm.
And I do this a lot with even the material that I have is I'll call up a friend or someone who has reached out to me on the internet because they watch my stuff. And I'm like, let me tell you this and let me see how you respond. And through that conversation, I start developing the idea further. Mm-hmm. But I can't do that just by,
right,
doing this sort of thing. And same thing with writing where it's like, the feeling I get is it's like, okay, there's something here and it's chaotic. And I can't grasp it. And by talking about it or by writing about it, it's like I'm taking this amorphous thing and I start giving it some form and I start laying it out. And I'm like, okay, I think it's looking like this. And I can organize it like this. And I accomplish that through speaking. And I accomplish that through writing.
Yeah, my wife is completely like that. So we're always philosophizing and she's like, I got to talk to you about this. And I don't really know what's coming in, but I got to just talk about it and we got to work through it. And I'm like the wall that she bounces things off of.
Right. Now, I don't know if that's the same for everybody,
mm-hmm.
or if it's just my personality trait. But I see I think the actual physiological muscle, sound, vocal cord aspect of this, in the way it relates to the philosophical idea of the logos, is that you need it to gain access to it in a certain sense.
Okay.
Because let me answer it this way. Did you know?
I did not.
That neurologically speaking, neurons do not fire without corresponding muscle movement, and muscles don't move without neurons firing.
Okay.
To the extent that animals or life that doesn't move doesn't have brains, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
There's a creature that lives in the sea that has two phases of its life. The first half, it swims around in the ocean. The second half, it latches to a rock and stays latched to that rock. The first half, it has a brain. And then the second half, it eats its brain because it doesn't need it anymore.
Wow.
And the reason is that the reason we have brains is because of motor requirements. We move.
Mm-hmm.
So what this blew me away once I figured this out, because the amount of more free will this gives you access to is pretty
mm-hmm.
incredible, is that thought has muscle movement.
Right.
And actually, if you want to clear your head, this is an interesting exercise, because I think we've all tried to meditate or clear our heads. And if you ever try the, okay, stop thinking technique, all you do is you think more.
Right.
If you try it this way, is you observe what you're thinking, and then you say, okay, what muscle is tensing to cause me to think that? And it's usually in your head somewhere. And if you identify that muscle and you relax the muscle, you'll notice that the thought disappears with it.
Wow.
And then there's another tension underneath that, where if you identify that tension and relax it, there's another thought that disappears with that, and you can start working deeper and deeper. And instead of addressing the thoughts, you address the muscles.
Right.
You can get the thoughts to go. Because you, again, this is like one of the base concepts of neurology, at least as I understand it. This is from reading a neurology textbook, not textbook, but a book from a neurologist, is that the fundamental aspect of brain mechanics is that in order for neurons to fire, muscles need to move. In order for muscles to move, neurons need to fire. This includes thinking.
Okay.
So in terms of voice, again, I'm talking about muscle movement.
Right.
And I guess I'll just leave it with a question because I don't necessarily have the answer to it. What neurons are firing when I speak logically? What neurons are firing when I write and use critical thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And then how else am I supposed to access those neurons if I don't move those muscles?
Okay, so like I don't write, I type a lot of the stuff. So just even that action of typing is stirring things up.
Well, and I think stirring things up, is it even clear enough, is that in order to access a certain part of your brain, if we work on the assumption that some muscle must move in order to access that aspect of your brain, what muscles do you move?
Right. It's a good question.
I don't have the answer to it, and I'm no professional at this, or and this may be somewhat something to talk to a neuroscientist about.
But basically, you're speaking your truth and speaking rationally in a rational manner and morally in some instances where you talked about your four circuits, but we won't get too much into that. But there is this thing of,
too late to start that now.
Yeah, but you're talking, and as you're accessing these different parts of the brain, that you are speaking the logos, and it's all kind of like a feedback loop.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much you know about Wilhelm Reich and his work.
Well, yes, I know. Well, I don't know about much about it, except for like the Oregon energy and the,
Well, he had this symbol in terms to refer to the psychosomatic aspect of humans, where you can access trauma both from the body and from the mind, and you work with both sides to access the other. Is you had the symbol where this line goes up and then it curves around and then meets in the center. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very interesting symbol of we can get to this point from both these sides, and you can't talk about one without talking about the other.
Right. Okay. Good. And so you're saying, and to clarify, you're saying basically that one informs the other, and we need to talk about the muscle side of it. We also need to talk about the thinking side of it. So the speaking part with the voice and getting the voice out there, but also the thinking side.
On the Kabbalistic tree of life, which I find fascinating.
Yes.
When you put it on top of the human body, you have Da'at, which focuses right on the throat. You've got, which is knowledge. You've got Bina, which is, I don't know how the mirror of the canvas is moving stuff, so I might have this on the wrong side when you watch this. Bina is over here, up here, and then which is understanding, which crosses over the third eye of Chokmah, which is wisdom. And so, however, this is the realm above existence. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's a brain cracker to talk about things within non-existence, but I mean, that's the conversation for another day. And below that is existence. And Da'at, the place at the throat, is this neither spot. It's this asymptotic region where it's neither one or the other. It's the crossing point.
Okay.
I find it fascinating that's on the throat, and that's knowledge, because that's the throat. Speaking is the way that we bridge what's going on in my mind to what's going on in your mind. There,
right.
Camera out of the screen. And through that voice is where we're able to access the understanding and cross it over, the third eye of our ability to make decisions to wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very, very powerful symbolic map for what we're talking about here, and why I'm emphasizing the voice so much, like the physical quality of the voice, because that's what we need to cross in order to, start gaining access to this upper thinking.
So I'm very quiet because some of this stuff is new to me. So I am processing it. And sometimes when you're processing it, it's a little more difficult to think about the questions that you need to ask.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is good stuff. I'm learning a lot with this. It's definitely a different way to look at the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah. Well, and then what I'm always trying to do is say, okay, here's a trivium, and here's the logos, and here's critical thinking, and here's stupid people, and here's fallacies, and here's grammar, and blah, blah, blah. So what? Why do I care?
Mm-hmm.
What is all this crap? What is this doing for me? At the end of the day, we are physical entities operating in a physical world with muscles. How does this higher order stuff translate into, you know, the physical me picking stuff up and moving stuff around and walking around and going to work and interacting with people? And I'm always looking to translate, how do I take this higher level stuff and bring it down to here?
Mm-hmm.
And down here is a lot of muscles. It's blood and bone and stuff. So I'm always looking at that in relation to the higher order stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and I think that so basically it's the voice is very important. Being able to, I mean, these people, obviously the people at Dunning-Kruger effect, they don't have a problem talking.
Right.
And we shouldn't have a problem talking either.
Well, that brings
in fact, we have less reason to not talk than they have. They have much more reason to stop talking than we have because they need to figure some shit out before they start talking. And we're the people that should be talking.
Yeah, it's, again, the Dan Pena thing. I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when we're smart, we have a tendency to think before we speak. Now, this is good in the sense that you don't proliferate bullshit.
Yes.
But at the second side, it's a weakness because guess what? The guy proliferating bullshit, he doesn't hesitate.
Right.
He is wrong and he is not in doubt.
Right.
So learning how to not hesitate like that and learning how to be confident in your mistakes. Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to make a mistake, make it glorious.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to fuck up, just like really do it.
I mean, this is another thing Jordan Peterson says. He's like, get out there and start writing your opinion out there. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. You're going to refine your opinion by getting into these little scraps. So you're going to get into these engagements. You're going to get entangled in them, and you're going to learn shit from it. And so
look forward to the mistakes.
Yes.
People say, you know, mistakes are necessary in order to achieve, or you're going to run into mistakes in order to achieve whatever goal that you have. I'll take that a step further. Is the mistakes are literally the stepping stones that you walk on to get to the next, to get to your goal.
Well, I would even say
those are the actual path. What's that?
I would say it even offers clarity. So you go through an experience, and then you look back at the experience, and you're like, oh, well, I learned some things from this. I've gained some new clarity about this and that and whatever. And you now can start making new decisions based on, and the next time you write something, it's going to be so it's like, the stair. You're walking up the stairs of these mistakes, but I wouldn't even call them mistakes as much as just opportunities to clarify your understanding. Because I mean, that's really what you're doing is you're making distinctions. You're creating ever more clarity. And even that's even what we are. We are constantly refining ourselves. You know, when you look at, somebody and they start carving out a sculpture, they're starting with the broad strokes first, and they start getting into the little details of the sculpture. And that's what we're doing on ourselves. We're developing ourselves. And you don't just it's just not one little hammer or chisel mark and all of a sudden the sculpture's done. Mm-hmm. You have to go through and you're just like refining, and you're making things more and more and more clear.
Right.
And that's what we have to do for our own identity.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Nathan, I've got to move on to the next thing of the day. I got to get my whole family into the car and take them somewhere.
Good. I was thinking that 2 hours is going to be probably just enough for people.
Yep. Cool.
Awesome. Well, it was good having you, and I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. This is a great conversation.
If you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you'd like to stay up to date with my videos, please subscribe. If you would like to be notified via email whenever I release a new video, please click the bell next to subscribe. If you have any comments or questions or would like to go into a dialogue about this topic, please leave them in the comments section below. I'm Nathan Martin with the Divine Pollination Hive and the UnityProcess.com. Be safe, be sovereign, be well.